Welcome to Torah Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
And I'm Robin.
And today we are discussing Parsha Ki Teitzei, which begins in Deuteronomy 21:10 and goes through 25:19.
Right.
And what is so interesting about this is that this portion and the next portion are like sister portions, because this one is Ki Teitzei, which means when you go out to war. And the next one's Ki Tavo, when you come into the land, to come into your inheritance. And so this, just knowing the titles of these two portions tells a story that you have to go out to war if you want to come into your inheritance. You have to fight for peace and for what God has for us.
It's kind of been a theme for the last 11 months, but this wraps it up. And there was one word that came to my mind when I started to study this portion. We just got back from a great little trip to Wisconsin, and I know that I'm speaking for both of us when I say it was really like meeting old friends we hadn't met yet.
Meeting old friends for the first time.
I mean it, and we just delighted with encountering these beautiful people, Bonnie and Ron and Tiffany and Tim, hello. And I just
and so many others.
I feel richer for having met so many of you. So thank you. But as we were there getting ready to come home and talk about this, the word that came to my mind was yikes. Because it's like,
is that a Hebrew word?
Yikes.
I don't know.
I started to read over this portion and I said, it's like holding a fire hose in front of my face. It's so full and so much all at once. And so we started to break it down, and then, as always, there's too much to share.
Just a few factoids here.
Okay.
There are 31 topics addressed in this Torah portion.
More mitzvot than any other portion.
And 72 commandments. Some people count 74 commandments in this brief Torah portion.
Thus the word yikes.
Thus drinking from a fire hose, right?
It's a lot.
But I think what sums us up and gives context to this is that it starts off when you will go out to war against your enemies. And then at the end of the portion, in chapter 25, verse 17, says, remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you were leaving Egypt.
That old Amalek.
And remember, Amalek always represents the appetites of the flesh. Amalek means people of licking up. And when the people got distracted, started whining and complaining, and when they asked, is God among us or not? Boom, Amalek attacked. And so this battle against Amalek is an ongoing battle.
Well, it's important to make some distinctions as we think of ourselves as battling and as warriors, because as I asked you the other day when we were chatting about it, I said, well, we learn in the writings of the New Testament that we are to stand and stand strong. We don't need to run out and track down and chase down the enemy, because we just need to stand strong and have our armor on, and he flees from us. So here we are in this portion where it says, when you go out. And so we have that conversation, Grant, that is so important, that we're going out and taking the initiative and tracking down the enemy that is within.
I've noticed something over my 70 plus years, and that is people who are always going out to argue and make theological war against other believers, or spiritual war against whatever they perceive as demonic out there.
It's crazy.
They all have unwon battles inside their own lives.
Right, and it's almost a way to avoid doing the work. And that internal work that sometimes we've heard the word musar work, which means the word musar is instruction. And I've been blessed to go about this pursuit of musar study with some great friends over the last few years. And it involves taking those traits of our soul that we need to bring into balance and make stronger. Things like humility and patience and gratitude and compassion and honor and simplicity. And I could go on and on. And this is what comes to mind when I read this portion. Am I on the right track as far as the internal work?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's one of the things where I think most Christians fall short, and where the observant Jews have it right, In Christianity, we all say, well, I need to be more patient, I need to be more wise, I need to be more long-suffering, I need to be more loving, I need these things. And we think that it'll just kind of happen as we grow older and mature.
And we're kind of passive about it.
We are. We think
Yeah.
it'll just kind of happen.
Yeah.
Like eventually I'll grow a beard or eventually I'll reach puberty or something. But in Judaism, they said, no, these are areas
Right.
of our souls, and we must go to work on them with intention. It's called musar,
Right.
which is a word found in Proverbs more than any other book, where you take something like, let's say, patience. All right, let's focus on patience for a week or for a month. Let's read what the word says about it, and let's practice patience, and let's get good at it. And then let's go on to another trait. I have to, if I don't share this now, forget, but when a man dons tefillin in the morning, he puts the head tefillin on, there's this beautiful blessing he prays. And part of it is, he asks for wisdom, he asks for understanding. But then he says, and by your power, cut down my foes and rebels.
Oh, man.
And of course, when you say that, we're not thinking about foes and rebels out there.
Or
we're thinking about the
evil
ones that exist right inside my own
Who
soul.
don't want, absolutely.
My foes and rebels are in me.
Right, right.
And so we put on God's word, we put on his armor to do battle against Amalek in my own life.
Well, all of these verses in this portion that are packed so tightly in address these very things, and we don't want to miss it. But one more mention of the fact that we have just started through the new month of Elul, and I mentioned last week briefly that the letters in Elul are an acrostic for that phrase in the Song of Songs, which says, I am my beloved's, my beloved is mine. And Rabbi Sachs, he's gone now from this world, he's moved to the next, but his words and his life remains. And one of the things he said is to think of this time of year as a time of focus, of change, of personal growth, of spiritual rededication, of really coming home. Coming home.
That's good.
And I just kind of get a lump in my throat when I think of the prodigal son's father waiting at the end of the road, because we're all lost.
Yeah.
We're all lost to an extent, and he's waiting for us to come home and return. And one more thing before we jump into the verses. I know, it's like a race.
By the time we jump in, it'll be time to jump out.
I know, but I promise.
Yeah.
Psalm 27 begins with, the Lord is my light and my salvation.
Yes.
Whom shall I fear? He is the defense of my life. And it goes on and on. This is the psalm to read every day this month. Every day we read this psalm, we hear the shofar, and we begin our return home.
Yes.
Now we're ready to jump in. Okay, so let's start in...
Well, here, let's start with the first verse, which is chapter 21, verse 10.
Okay.
Now, I call Teitzei, this Torah portion, the war portion.
Okay.
This is our portion for doing battle. It starts with war. When you go out to war, it ends with, the fight against Amalek. But everything between the opening and the close
is how to do that.
Is command. Well, it's nothing to do with what you'd think was warfare. It's all about returning lost objects, raising your kids right, not lying, driving a mother bird away from the nest before you take the eggs or the young. Don't plow with an ox and donkey together. It's like, well, what does this have to do with warfare?
What we were just talking about.
Well, it has to do with the warfare in me. So as I build these commandments in my life, I can begin to conquer Amalek in me. Now, this opening is, when you first read it, think,
it's so weird.
What does this have to do with anything? But there's such a beautiful progression here. In verse 10, it says, when you go out to war against your enemies, and Adonai your God will deliver them into your hand, and you will capture its captivity.
Okay.
And you will see among its captivity a woman who is beautiful of form. It doesn't say she's pretty, but from the neck down, she's beautiful of form.
Right.
Now, Joseph and his mother Rachel were said to be beautiful of face and of form. But here, you can tell the man is just, in a heightened level of desire, because he's been up there fighting, and he can take what he wants. And this is a very dangerous time. And so you see this woman of beautiful form, and you will desire her. You may take her to yourself for a wife.
Okay.
In other words, you can't just use her, but you can take her as a wife.
Because you think this is what you want.
You take it, you take all the responsibilities. But it says, now here's some things to do. She shall remove the garment of her captivity from upon herself and sit in your house, and she will weep for her father and mother for a full month.
So you give her time to grieve.
Yes. Okay. Sometimes these women would dress up in their sexiest, most beautiful garments so that a soldier would not kill them, but would want to take them.
Okay.
But he's saying, okay, no, just have her sit in some old sack dress or something.
Yeah, let her be who she
Yes.
is. Right.
Let her weep for her parents for a month. So her face is going to be all puffy and her eyes swollen and her skin blotchy. And thereafter you may come to her and live with her, and she shall be a wife to you. But it shall be that if you do not desire her, then you shall send her on her way. But you may not sell her for money. You shall not enslave her, because you have afflicted her. And there's a beautiful principle here. You know, talking to our friends in Wisconsin, Ron and I were talking about expensive toys. Us men, we love expensive toys, and
yes,
you know,
do.
whether it's you didn't have to agree to that, but
it's okay.
We all know it's true. But you know, things like motorcycles or boats or drones or whatever it might be. But God is saying here, okay, you see something you want? All right, you can get it. But stop for a second. Understand what comes along with that ownership. Recognize that there's going to be maybe insurance, there's going to be upkeep, extra expenses, extra storage space that it's going to consume, and other resources and repairs. And so look at the ugly side of it at the same time, like with this woman. See the beauty, but see the part that's not so attractive. Count the cost, and if you want it, go ahead. But after you really think about what it's going to be like to have that in your life for a period of time, I decide it's not so much worth it.
Well, I appreciate what you're getting at.
But you disagree. I can see it in your face.
I'm kind of uncomfortable with you comparing a woman, a human person, to a toy.
Well, see, this is the thing. I'm glad you brought that up. Because when the man first sees her,
that's all he considers
all he sees is the toy.
All right.
So God twice reminds him, no, you take her. She's going to be a wife.
Okay.
Oh, I'm not so sure I want one of those, the guy has to think. So God's reminding him, this is going to be more than something to satisfy your temporary lust for pleasure. Now the next thing, you go to verse 15, it goes on to the next step. It's a normal, natural development. If a man has two wives, loves one, hates the other, they each bear a son, you still give the inheritance of the firstborn, even if he is the son of the wife you don't like so much. And a wife you take quickly, or a captive you take as a wife, might turn out to be a woman you wish you hadn't married. But God said you still treat her right. And if her offspring is the firstborn, you make sure you give him the double portion.
There's a required level of respect and honor here.
Yes.
Okay.
But then the third thing is what happens in verse 18 if a man will have a wayward, rebellious son who does not hearken to the voice of his father and the voice of his mother. So you think about this man who takes this woman, I got to have her. And he takes her into his home, marries her, and he thinks,
his heart wasn't to be a husband and father.
No. And now he's living the consequences of a decision.
Okay.
And now they've given birth to a son. And he has to give this son a double portion. But now the son is a big rebel, a big fat rebel. He's a glutton and a drunkard.
Wow. So this is all connected.
It's all connected.
Got it.
And then verse 22, if a man shall have committed a sin whose judgment is death. So let's continue the story of the son. What if this gluttonous and rebellious and drunken son commits a sin that's worthy of death? He shall be put to death, and you shall hang him on a tree.
What an image.
His body shall not remain for the night on the tree. Rather, you shall surely bury him on that day, for a hanging person is a curse of God. So I find it interesting. This portion begins with a man seeing a woman's body. And then this chapter ends with a son whose body is nailed to a tree because he's been executed for a horrible sin.
And it's all the same story.
It's all the same story.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. It's the brilliance of God's Torah.
When you look below the surface.
Things that seem completely unrelated, you look and you see there's a story being told here.
Well, speaking of looking beneath the surface and an important story being told, can we go to 22 with the lost animals?
Sure, yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
This is amazing. In 22:1, you shall not see your countryman's ox or his sheep straying away and pay no attention to them. You shall certainly bring them back to your countryman. And then the verses following even go further with being responsible to make it right when you find something lost. So talk to me about that.
It says you take it into your house until your brother comes to search for it. Your translation says countryman. In the Hebrew, it's the word ach, which is brother. Now, brother means a countryman, someone who's close.
Sure.
And, Yemima Mizraki, I love saying her name.
Well, I love reading what she says.
She wrote this beautiful thing about this in this Torah portion. She says, in Teitzei, we read that if a person finds an object that belongs to someone else, he has an obligation to keep it in his possession until your brother seeks it, it says. Commenting on this verse, the Or HaChaim notes something profound. We are the lost objects of God, he says. We went missing, and Adonai is searching for us. It is as if Adonai is saying, where is he? Where is she? And so it says, you keep this lost object, this lost animal, this lost thing. And if your brother is not near you or you don't know him, then bring it inside your house. Ad ro shachicha oto, until your brother seeks it. The commandment we receive in this passage is not only about mere possessions that somehow end up on our property. It's an obligation regarding the lost children of God.
Oh, wow.
And we all know of lost children. And Messiah said, I came to seek and to save that which is lost. We know lost people. And so until Messiah finds them, we always say, I found the Lord. No, you didn't. You finally got tired of running from him.
Isn't it fascinating that the first words, the words that God speaks to Adam and Eve once.
Where are you?
Where are you?
Yes.
When they left Eden.
Yeah. So we should take care of the lost ones until God finds them and takes ownership of them again.
It's so easy to disregard difficult people.
Yes,
and
it is.
It's so easy to assume it's not your problem.
Yeah.
But to love people and to hold them in a safe place until they can connect with God, that is our duty.
That's right.
Isn't
so
that
true?
I just need to have a moment. That's amazing.
Yeah. What's interesting, this word for a lost article is the word avad. And that's the root of the place Abaddon, the place of destruction. But the word avad, for like Abaddon, is a word for being lost. Being lost until the owner comes and finds it.
And we're to reflect him. And we are to seek to be close to him ourselves.
Yes.
And there are parts of our own souls, like we mentioned a moment ago, that are lost. And we have to hold it and be responsible for it and make sure it's returned home.
Yes.
So on another level, we are all at this time of year especially mindful of making sure all those parts of us that aren't quite where they should be, close to the Father, are returned home. I think of the prodigal son's father standing and just there for the return.
Yeah. What I find really interesting here too is that, as Yemima Mizraki points out, you hold on to it in your home until your brother seeks after it. In other words, you don't go back seeking the owner, because maybe that owner is not a very good steward of this lost object. And if they had been a better steward, they wouldn't have lost it.
Yeah.
So this lamb or goat or ox, the owner is slipshod and careless and irresponsible, and so the animals wander away and they can get hurt or killed or stolen. So it's like, I'm going to hold on to it. Now, if he comes looking for it, he can have it back because it's his. But if he's not going to look at it, that animal's better off with me as a caretaker.
So we're even to have compassion on an ox in a ditch.
Yes.
And make sure that they're not suffering.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Now, we need to be careful how we apply that principle, or we might find ourselves stealing under the guise of being a protector of something that belongs to someone else. But that's built into here because we're talking about living things. And God cares about living things, as we see with the mother bird.
Right. Well, before we get to the mother bird, there's a verse that I never was required to memorize in Sunday school. I doubt you were either.
So which one is that?
Verse 5, where we are told a woman shall not wear a man's clothing, nor a man put on a woman's clothing. For whoever does these things, it's an abomination to the Lord your God. And oh my goodness, the whole idea that we have been assigned a physical container to live out this journey, and God determined it. And if he determined that I am to be a woman in this world, for me to say, no, not so much, I'm going to dress like a man, behave like a man, transition to a man. What that is saying is, God, you are not, well, you don't exist, basically. And if you do exist, I am going to defy what you chose for me when you assigned my soul to this earth. Right?
That's absolutely true. And it's interesting, verse 5, as I glance down here, the word for a man's garment, the word for a woman's garment are different words. In other places, they're the same word is used. But here, it's making a distinction. And so the translation here refers specifically to a feminine garment on a man.
For the purpose of becoming feminine.
Yeah. And you look at clothing today, there's really not much difference between guys and girls' clothing. Everything's kind of unisex.
Yeah.
And if everything's unisex, then sex is gone.
Well,
because sexuality, the beauty of sexuality is things being opposite, complete opposite of one another.
Yeah.
Like you and I, we're nothing alike.
Different.
But that's awesome.
Different planets.
We never get bored.
Well, we'll save going further on that topic for maybe a future episode and chat. But I just didn't want to skip it all together, which lands us on 22:6.
Or we're going to yes, right.
What in the world do baby birds and eggs have to do with overcoming the tendencies in our own souls that we need to address?
Well, I think it has to do with that principle, if you're faithful in small things, then you can be entrusted with big things.
Isn't there a teaching that this is the simplest of all the mitzvot to carry out?
Because normally you come close enough to a nest, the mother bird flies away.
So
but this is what it says, if a bird's nest happens to be before you on the road or on any tree or on the ground,
near
young birds or eggs, and the mother's roosting on the young birds or the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely send away the mother and take the young for yourself. So that it will be good for you and you will prolong your days. In other words, there are two commandments in the Torah that promise length of days. Driving the mother bird away before you take the eggs, and honoring your parents, which is the fifth of the 10 Commandments. And the rabbis say honoring your parents is the most difficult and complicated of the 10 Commandments, of all the commandments. But driving away mother birds is the easiest of all the commandments. Yet they both come with a promise of long life.
And that doesn't mean years. It means
rich
and abundant.
Yes, it means length of days, not a lot of years of a lifetime. That means like the sign says you often see, it's not the number of days in your life, but the amount of life in your days.
Potential. Fulfilling your potential.
So if the easiest commandment comes with the promise of length of days, and the most difficult commandment, or at least one of the most difficult, comes with the same promise, then we really don't know what the reward is for all the other commandments. We should never say, oh, this commandment's going to have a big reward, I'm going to do it. This commandment probably doesn't have much reward, I'm going to ignore that. He's saying, pay attention to everything. And if you are conscientious with little things that are easy to do, then you're going to be conscientious with big things.
Because little things are big
Yeah.
things. And when I read this perplexing little verse, I think he doesn't want us to be greedy.
No.
And take the mother and the eggs and everything that we can just absorb into ourselves because we're takers. But we have to have regard for how our actions affect others, even a mother, even a mommy bird.
Yeah. Yeah, God cares even for the sparrows.
Isn't that something?
Look at verse 12 for a second. Now here's especially today, this is a simple commandment to keep. You shall make for yourselves, that's the twist, the tassels on the garment. I'm looking for the place about I'm looking at verse 11.
Okay.
You shall not wear combined fibers, wool and linen together. What that means, you don't wear animal fibers and plant fibers in the same garment. And I say it's easy to keep today because we were at the store this morning and you were looking at some clothes and it's on the label. So you can look at a label and if it has wool and cotton and you think, well, I don't get that.
But why?
Who cares?
But still.
Yeah, okay, why?
Why?
I think part of it is so we do this exercise
We're mindful.
of just being mindful that even when I buy a garment, God is my partner in the store when I do my shopping. But God wants us to see male as male, female as female. You don't plow with a donkey and an ox. A donkey is a donkey and an ox is an ox. You don't sow mixed grain in your fields.
There are some important distinctions in this world.
You don't use mixed fibers. He wants us to maintain distinctions in certain ways, just so we're conscientious about righteousness and sin. If we raise our children being conscientious, this is a piece of kosher meat that is permitted, this is meat that is not permitted, this is a garment that's permitted, this is a garment that's not. We just practice that ability to discern and to pay attention, what we put on, what we put in, what we do. We're going to pay attention to the big things. This is such a little thing, but you start here.
Right.
You don't skip the little things and jump into the big things.
Well, you mentioned the commandment not to plow with an ox and a donkey together. You know, once again, at a glance, it's like, well, who cares? But once again, it's having compassion on both because they have different strengths. And if a donkey and an ox are trying to plow side by side, they're both going to be very frustrated.
And they're different heights, different strengths, different leg strength.
They have different work to do.
They're going to be so chafing because of the other one. It's going to be miserable work.
It reminds me of the principle of training up a child in his own way because each child has their strengths. And you can't just generalize and expect everybody to follow a certain path because that's the one you particularly think is right. You have to be very careful about those things.
And you know, the word in the apostolic scriptures tells us don't be unequally yoked with an unbeliever.
It makes so much sense.
And we all get that. But so we don't want to be unequally yoked with an unbeliever, like in a marriage. But then we go and unequally yoke all kinds of other things in our lives.
Yeah, even with friendships and relationships and business partnerships. And it's just not fair to anybody.
Or they'll have a Bible verse on this wall, and then there's a statue of Buddha over here on this wall. Or, anyways, won't even get into it.
Yeah, you're going down a tangent.
I am.
Okay.
Rein me in, Robin.
Rein me in. So where do we go from here? Like I said, it's been a fire hose.
Well, I don't want us to finish this discussion without mentioning there are two kinds of warfare in the Torah and in our lives. This warfare is the war against Amalek and me, my own fleshly desires, my own way of doing things. But there's another kind of warfare where I'm just a stand and God fights. If you remember, and again, this Torah portion refers back to this, when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they came to the Red Sea, the Egyptian cavalry is bearing down on them, and they all were in despair.
Can you imagine?
And God tells Moses to instruct the people, stand still, be quiet, don't be afraid, behold the salvation of the Lord. And so the sea opens, they go across, and God fights Egypt, not Israel. God does the war.
While they watched.
Then at the end of that same Torah portion, Amalek attacks, and God says, you fight the war.
Right.
I'll stand, but you fight. So who are these two enemies?
And how do we know the difference?
Well, the one enemy, Egypt and Pharaoh, that is a picture of our enemy, Satan.
And the external
And God says,
darkness.
I'll take care of him. All you have to do is resist him. Stand and resist, he'll flee from you. But he says, that's the enemy I will fight and conquer. I'm taking care of that.
You just have to have your armor on, hold up your shield,
Right.
and choose to think of what is true.
But when it comes to Amalek, he says, I'll stand, you fight. And see, what we want to is for God to fight Amalek for us. He says, that's not my battle. I'll help you. I'll strengthen you. I'll stand with you. But you have to fight. If you don't fight, Amalek's going to win in your life.
It's like when we were kids and we were given that distorted picture of being a Christian and following Jesus, when you let him drive the car and you just kind of climb in the back seat and go to sleep. And that is not the life we're called to live.
No, God insists we stay the driver's seat.
We got to drive our own life.
We have to drive it.
And he will show us how to do that.
But we follow his map and his traffic laws as we drive this car. Huge difference. And he will not take the wheel. He will not take the wheel. So there might be exceptions to that. But let's keep our hands on the wheel.
One more little passage in this, it's a strange one at a glance, but it's worth touching on before we wrap up our conversation today. And it's toward the end of the portion in chapter 23, those verses between 12 and 15, which, I mean, it discusses something rather unpleasant, like when you're in the war and you have to go outside the camp to like relieve yourself, and there's dirty excrement. You take the time to cover it up. You don't leave your mess behind for other people to deal with. Why is that described and given to us to observe and understand?
Well, look how it's worded. It's 23:14. Ye shall have a tent peg. This is what they used to dig to cover their excrement. Ye shall have a tent peg in addition to your weapons. That gives it a new context.
Yes, it does.
This is considered a weapon. Now, we think of our weapons that we use against the enemy. But this is saying it's treating this tent peg itself as a weapon. Because what did Messiah say? It's the things that come out of a man's heart that defile him. Well, think of your physical excrement as being those unclean things that come out of us. And the way we weaponize, or we fight against them, use a weapon against it, is we cover it. So no one else steps in it. So it doesn't impact others.
Bury it so other people don't have to step in it.
Right. And we're to keep our camp, our lives, our homes a holy place. We goof up. There are things that we do, we'll say, and attitudes we'll exhibit. It's like, oh, that's so ugly. It's so horrifying and repulsive. All right, bury it. I mean, confess it, get it out. But you have to then put it out of sight, protect others from it. And that's what it's about.
Yeah, and this is in the context of being in the middle of battle. And I have to think that I'm not the only one, that when I'm in the middle of just life, doing life, battling things from within and those things without, trying to be faithful, I can get worn down. And when you wear out, you tend to kind of let your guard down And it's easier to engage in antisocial behavior that hurts other people. You have to continue to be vigilant and other-oriented and responsible.
That's right.
That's the practicality level that this Torah portion calls us to live on.
And here's a very practical application as well. You know, it's wonderful to hear a testimony of someone who was a rebellious sinner in the world and how they turned their lives around and became a follower of God and a disciple of Yeshua. Those are wonderful stories. But I hear believers sometimes, and I think this is more with men than women, but men will get together and they're all very grateful that they're now followers of God and disciples of Yeshua, but sometimes they'll talk about their past lives, about how drunk they used to get, how they used to run around, how they used to take drugs, how they used to curse and have a foul mouth. And what they're doing is they have to be careful of not digging up their excrement. Things that should be buried and not brought up. And I know as a kid growing up in the church, I'd hear so many testimonies about how horrible, how horrifying some of these sinners were before they came to Messiah.
But you could tell they were kind of yearning for the good old days.
Well, I would think, well, I want to have a really great testimony too. So it actually made sin attractive to me, thinking, well, maybe if I spend a few years in the Hell's Angels and then repent, I'll have a great story too, and I can go tell other young people about how
it can get weird.
It can get weird.
It can get weird.
So we just need to be cautious. There's an appropriate time to share our past, and there's an appropriate way to do it. But there's also a very inappropriate way, and there's some things in the past you leave back there. So
I feel like I'm jumping over a big space to go from that subject to...
But we need to wrap this up.
We need to wrap up. And as we started out, reminding ourselves that this is the month where we're invited to be mindful that we have a beloved and he wants us to be close to him. And I was thinking, Grant, of how when you're in love and you, especially in those early days of a romance, you're so preoccupied with one another.
I still am. 44 years.
Of course you
I
are.
still am.
I know. It's hard to get you to do anything other than just moon over me.
I know. It's just, I get nothing done.
It's just weird. Anyway, in seriousness, you know, lovers are obviously preoccupied with thinking about the other.
Yes.
And I want to challenge ourselves and our listeners to become so preoccupied with our beloved.
Yes.
That's all we think about.
I agree.
I mentioned Psalm 27. And in that psalm, in verse 8, it says, "When you said, 'Seek my face,' my heart said to you, 'Your face, O Lord, shall I seek.'"
Yes.
He's inviting us to seek his heart, his face, his very essence, and to draw close and to return home and to trust his word to be good for us.
That's right.
He doesn't want us to miss out on anything beautiful in this life, right?
So true. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a wonderful psalm. And, you know, I've been doing this series on the Psalms, and I've completed Psalm 32, and 33 is what I want to try to get recorded as soon as possible. But every time I look at one of these Psalms I've done and taught on, all the thoughts and memories flood back.
It's a love song.
It's such an amazing psalm.
It is.
Truly incredible song.
And you know, like we keep trying to learn, and it's becoming clearer to me as we've paid more attention to the portions this year than ever, that he wants us to trust our Maker for his plan and design for our life.
Well, maybe we should close this out with the last two verses of Psalm 27.
Absolutely.
Which say this: "I would have despaired unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of Adonai in the land of the living. So wait for Adonai. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for Adonai."
Perfect.
The best is yet to come.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, shalom, everyone.
Yes, God bless.
And talk to you soon, hopefully.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.